Welcome to the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast, where host and lacrosse expert Jamie Monroe will do what he does best, talk about lacrosse. Each episode will provide listeners with education, insights, stories, and lessons about the lacrosse world. We will discuss current events, coaching, philosophies, and college lacrosse recruiting. Now let's get started with your host, Jamie Monroe.
How's it going, everybody? Really excited to introduce Joe Amplo, the new head coach at the U.S. Naval Academy. Joe, welcome to the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast. Fired up to have you on here.
Jamie, fired up to be with you, man. Good to talk to you again.
Congrats on the new job. I know I asked you this in our little pre-game conversation there, but are you drinking out of a fire hose now or what?
Yeah, a little bit. Certainly it's been exciting, but nothing to complain about. All good things, all good challenges that we've kind of faced already and that lie ahead.
I took a trip actually last February on my RV trip across the country and stopped at Navy. It was really my first time really checking the place out. I'd played there and competed there as a coach when I was at Yale back in the 90s, but really hadn't checked out the campus. But, man, really one of the more impressive campuses and places on earth.
Yeah, it is. Did they let the RV on the yard, or did you have to park it outside?
Oh, we had to park in the stadium. The RV was definitely not allowed in the yard. The inhabitants of the RV were allowed on campus.
That's beautiful.
It was. Dude, we went literally from Chicago all the way. We went Northwestern, Michigan, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Cleveland State, Albany, Colgate, then down.
Yeah, listen, I would have followed you along, but once you passed us in Milwaukee, I figured, all right, we're off the RV list. So you could have made a left-hand turn at Chicago. But, we won't hold it against you, Jamie.
I was trying to get out of the polar vortex, though.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is brought to you in part by the JM3 Lacrosse Academy. This 10-week online program is designed to teach cutting-edge lacrosse skills and IQ. Athletes will learn dozens of new techniques, creative drills, X's and O's, and most importantly, how to integrate it all into their game. To learn more or start getting better today, go to www.jm3sports.com/academy.
But Joe, you've had an amazing, run of great places that you've been. And what I love to do with any of the guys that come on and all the coaches that come on is talk about your coaching journey and starting where you came from and the coaches that you had as a player, as well as the guys you worked for, as well as the assistants that you had along the way. And I'd just love to have you start off maybe at back in the Sachem days.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us in our generation, when we grew up, our middle school and high school coaches were probably if not the most, some of the most influential men in our lives. And I still hold those guys near and dear to my heart. The gentleman who coached me, people won't know these names because they're as humble and as behind the scenes as they are impactful. Gene Higgins and Tim Cummings and guys from Sachem High School, but probably the most important person in my life then was my high school football coach, Fred Fusaro. That guy told me without telling me that I wanted to be an educator and be a coach. He loved his players. He was hard and tough and all the things that a young Italian boy growing up in the middle class Long Island needs. He brought that, and from the moment he was in my life until now, he has made an impact on it every day. And, I thought I would grow up, go to college, and be a high school football coach and lacrosse coach and kind of be a poor man's Fred Fusaro. But that's where I got my love for just being around people, from them. And then went to Hofstra.
And then Hofstra.
Yeah, I went to Hofstra, walked on. I was going to, like I said earlier, I thought I'd play football in college, but I was too small and slow. It was Division III options at best. And then Dino said, yeah, we'll take your parents' money and you can try and walk onto the lacrosse team. So paid the full freight to go be a short stick defensive midfielder for Dino. And Chris Colbeck was our assistant coach at the time.
Yeah.
And Seth Tierney, who's now the head coach, obviously was the volunteer. So we had just an awesome staff my freshman year.
Wow.
I mean, just great people around us. And, Dino is who he is, right? I mean, he's probably now to date one of the more influential, consistent people in my life. But he is the same man, minus the mustache, that he is now. He was then, just a loving, caring, affable person who was always about the right stuff, and taught the game at its most purest form and basic levels. And, he's blessed now to be at one of the great institutions of our sport, where the same BS he was teaching us on Hempstead Turnpike was working with pretty damn good athletes at Duke, But that year, those years early on there at Hofstra, it's like, we were trying to prove ourselves, right? It was the mid 90s, and Hofstra was really good for a year or two, and then they were just good. And it was kind of that era when there was the giants of our sport, and then that next group of schools that were trying to prove themselves, right? And every year somebody would creep in, right? 93, Hofstra makes the quarterfinals, and then 94, 95, they're not that good. And I show up there in 96, and we had something to prove, man. We just, and we were forced to have something to prove because Chris Colbeck was probably the best lacrosse coach I'd ever been around. And he just willed us to be better than we thought we could be, And that year we go on and we have a great year and kind of went on a run from 96 until, probably 2010, that Hofstra was in discussion, every single year, and some years they were as good as number 2 in the country, but most years they were in discussion with the big boys, and I was blessed to be a part of that run for most of it as a player and a coach, and working for, Danowski when I first got out, and then for Seth. It's 2 guys who have won national championships, Seth at Hopkins and certainly John at Duke. So, and they're both 2 completely different people,
Yeah.
Dino's is as nice as can be, and Seth can be nice when he wants to be,
Like we all can.
Yeah, like we all can. But just having the experience of working for those 2 guys at that place taught me a lot, and in between, I did go to Penn for a year, and I think about that year as like my coaching boot camp. I was a volunteer at Hofstra for 2 years. And then Matt Hogan called me when he was the head coach. He's like, hey, look, I want to talk to you about the job. It pays $8,000 and, come to Philadelphia and learn how to coach lacrosse. And I said to my wife, who we were just married and just bought a house on Long Island, I said, just give me 8 months and let's see what happens, And I think that was probably my favorite year coaching, aside from my first year at Marquette, because it was kind of like do or die, man. Like we had to make it work, or else I wasn't going to be in this profession. And my wife would drive down on the weekends, and I would live in this 3rd floor apartment for like $200 a month, and walk to work because I couldn't afford gas, and eat power bars every day. But I was working 10 feet from Mike Murphy, who's now the head coach there.
Yeah.
And, working for Matt Hogan, who had a great career to date, up until that point.
Yep.
So I just jumped in with 2 feet and tried to learn. And, Murph and I became like best of friends, and we still talk almost every week and sometimes every day if we need each other. That guy taught me how to grind and how to coach, how to coach in the office, right? What does recruiting look and feel like, the conversations to have, what do letters look like, how do you reach out to people, what do you say, what does a scouting report look like, all the stuff that people on the outside don't realize that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. Mike Murphy taught me.
So what year was that?
It was 2001.
2001.
Yeah. So.
Now, when did Mike – so it's pretty funny because when I first got the job at Denver, Murph wasn't coaching college lacrosse. He was in Ridgefield. He might have been coaching in high school or something, helping out at Ridgefield. And he used to come out and come to practices at DU because he was – I forget what he was doing, but he was doing some kind of sales, and he'd be in Denver every now and then. He would come out to our practices, and I remember picking his brain all the time. I remember him really teaching me the deep zone ride that literally became like a really, really good ride that me and Thorpe, ran all the time. Yeah. It's just amazing. I totally forgot that he was at Penn when Hogs was there, and I didn't ever actually realize that you were there. So that's very cool.
Yeah, it was a quick stint, but it was honestly had such an impact on my coaching life and my friendships. Like I said, Mike and I are extremely close, and that's lasted. And we only spent 8 months together. So, and then, I went back to Hofstra and we had a good run, and the turnover with Seth, and I did work for Lars Tiffany for 2 weeks at Stony Brook. So, there's different paths and different, we all take these different paths to where we're at. You know, and then at Hofstra, lacrosse is really important, right? Like lacrosse was the sport, if it's still not the sport at that place. And we were blessed to have tremendous support there. So when I had opportunities to look at head coaching opportunities, I always kind of judged it against that. You know, I want to be at a place where you can have the resources necessary to do your job. And I had interviewed at a bunch of places, but wasn't fortunate enough to get the jobs, which were blessings in disguise, truthfully, because I probably would have jumped at any opportunity that was offered to me. And when Marquette called, I was not that interested. And not that's probably unfair to say to them, but just the time of the year. It was like the middle of December, and we were getting ready to celebrate Christmas and, you know, get ready for the season. And when Dave Cottle called and said they wanted to talk to me, I said, yeah, I'll take the interview because I wanted to impress Dave. And then the minute I sat down in the room with those folks, I was blown away by how in sync we were with our conversations. You know, my philosophy on coaching and leadership met the institution, and I felt like the people that were talking to me believed in what I was saying, and I believed in how they wanted the program to be run. So I went home and told my wife, I said, look, if we don't take this opportunity, I'm never going to be a head coach at a place that's going to believe in me as much as this place. So that's why we ended up in Milwaukee, you know.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it was fun, man. It really was. It was really fun. It was a place that I grew up as a coach. I was allowed to make mistakes because nobody knew what the heck a lacrosse stick was. So there was a lot. There was a lot of outreach trying to teach people about the game and develop a program. But what I learned there is it's about the people. It's not about the things that you have. It's about the people that you're surrounded by that make the difference in your life as a coach, but more importantly, on the lives of the students that you're working with. You know, and that's all you need is good people, because early on, we really didn't have anything. You know, I'm sitting here, it's September. The first locker room for Marquette lacrosse was this past March. And those kids, while they're blessed to have that locker room, I know for a fact that that's just a thing that they have. It doesn't really make a difference in their lives. But the people that they're surrounded by on that campus really matter most. And when I was considering coming here, I judged everything I learned there about the human aspect of our jobs and organizations. I judged the Naval Academy against Marquette. And that's why I'm so comfortable in saying that this was the right opportunity, because I wasn't going to leave for just any opportunity or even a good opportunity. I was going to leave for what I considered to be a great opportunity. Not better than Marquette, just it's a better fit for me at this time of my life. But again, I can say nothing bad about any place I've been. And just like you and all of us, we've been blessed to be around great people and
no doubt
learned about everything along the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at Marquette, you know, to put a loop on it, you did a great job building a program from scratch and making a program that like legitimately competed. And the year that Carolina won the championship, you guys could have won that game, and it could have been you. And that's really said a lot, because I feel like Loyola in around 2012 kind of proved to the world that anybody, you know, a mid-major could win a championship. And it was really amazing to watch them do that, and then watch you do what you did there, along with a lot of guys like Chamatz came on this last week. I mean, building a program from scratch and being able to build it sort of in your own, you know, vision of what your vision is, but also with the vision of the players, and to be able to actually go out and win, and to do it from the West was really cool. And I've met a few of your guys, by the way. BJ Grill I've become friends with over the last year or so. Love that guy.
You two remind me a lot of about you guys are exactly alike in your thinking. He's a good man.
Yeah, nonstop, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, to your point, it's like, listen, I think the sport has grown so much, and you know, it's funny you mentioned the Loyola thing in 2012. I remember clear as day. That was the second year of our program, and we had not played a game yet, or we had just finished our first year, and we had a new AD at the time, and didn't really know lacrosse. And lacrosse was a little bit of a burden for the department at that time because, you know, we were drained funding-wise and we didn't have any facilities. And this new AD comes in, he's like, I got to build these guys locker rooms and get them a field. And, you know, so you worry about it as a coach, right? What's going to happen? You know, this guy didn't start the sport. Someone else did, and now he's gone. And I remember I was in the weight room and he was in there, and it was just after the national championship. And I went up to him. I said, "Isn't it amazing that a small Jesuit college just won the lacrosse national championship? You know, I just wonder what can happen at a bigger Jesuit institution, you know, than Loyola." And from that point on, not that conversation sparked it. Maybe it was because he started to get to know our program and our kids. But there was just this interest and this groundswell of curiosity that followed our program. And, you know, then we were lucky enough to be pretty good the first couple of years, and got really good really in our third year, where we were ranked as high as 9th in the country. I think that really piqued a lot of people's interest into, all right, you could compete at a national level no matter where you are in this sport, because the sport is so big. You just got to find the right people.
No doubt. Well, you've got some awesome assistant coaches now at Navy that you were able to bring on. And let's just change gears here and talk about Navy and talk about, you know, what it's going to be like to build the culture and what you're trying to hope to do, you know, on the field. But starting with culture, as opposed to Marquette, where you built the culture from scratch, now you're inheriting a team, and now you have to try to build a culture. How does it, you know, how are you doing it, and how is it different?
Well, it's different. I think in some ways it's a little bit more challenging, because when there is no culture at a place, you don't have to reset. You know, it's your culture from the day you walk in. Here, I'm inheriting a culture that is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to make that. It's just there are things that I want to do differently. You know, it's different expectations, and just as simple as language. But you know how we're doing it is we're trying to really engage with these guys. I think the biggest challenge for us right now, Jamie, is trying to understand this place and what these young men go through on a daily basis. Right. Yeah. So we're trying to build the culture here with a lot of empathy, and you know then we'll insert our culture as forceful as we need to be based on what these guys are going through. I find myself listening more than I did when I first got to Marquette, but also talking more and yelling less, if that makes sense. I mean, if you ask BJ Grill, he probably never heard me talk. You know, maybe when we had our Christmas party, but I think I yelled the first 3 years I was at Marquette. Here, these guys, they don't need another person yelling at them, right? They need a person who's going to listen and love and care and engage on a more personal level. And that's my feeling right now, because I want to dive into the interpersonal relationships with these guys and make them know that they're cared about, and have lacrosse be their safe haven. It doesn't mean we're not going to be demanding of them, but I cannot be demeaning. And I told them last week, I said, look, if there's ever a point where lacrosse is not the best part of your day, you have full autonomy to walk into my office and try and tackle me, because every day has got to be the most important part of your day and your favorite part of the day. Because if we lose that, then I think we're losing everything that we're supposed to do here at the academy. You know, there'll be hard days from now and until the end here, but we got to make it fun for them.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting how you talk about, you know, the difference between you when you first got to Marquette and now. I mean, it's like, you know, I always compare being a first-time head coach. You know, it's like having kids. You can read all the books you want, but you cannot be prepared. And you're definitely going to try a lot harder maybe with the first kid than the third or fourth kid, just because you just realize that, you know, you're just trying so hard. But it's interesting to sort of listen to you talk about, you know, attacking it with more listening and empathy and really make them love it, because the love of the game, it does matter, you know, without a doubt. Like the kids that want to play in May versus that want to just go home makes a really big difference. And there's definitely that happens in programs.
Yeah. And also I think, you know, the one thing that may not been missing, but has not been there's no culture of lacrosse work here, right? There's this culture of these kids will do whatever we ask, you know. If I say to my team at 4:00 today, go run through a wall or go, you know, swim across the Severn River, because that's going to make us a better team, they're going to do it. They're extremely task-oriented. They're yes, sir, no, sir. They want to please. But what hasn't existed is this culture of lacrosse work where they're going to stay a little bit later or they're going to find time throughout their day to do a little bit extra work. And I believe at the highest levels there needs to be this culture of work, right? I'll give you a real-life example. Last week we're doing our group work right now before we start full practice next week. So we practiced for, I think, maybe 90 minutes last week. And it was a relatively hard practice. And then after the practice, you know, everybody's going their separate ways. And I look on the side of the field, and there's these 8 guys, all in our junior class, or second class, as I come to learn now. That's what they're called. Mm-hmm. They're on the sideline, and they're doing, I don't know, gosh, it must have been 100 burpees. They're doing sit-ups and push-ups, and they're completely destroying each other physically, you know. And we had just gone through a practice. They had gone through their whole class day, so they're definitely tired. But they took it upon themselves to just further bury themselves from a physical and mental standpoint, right? So Orson and Ross are standing next to me, and I'm like, look at this. I'm like, yeah. Brad says, yeah, look at that. That's great that they're doing this, but look behind us. There's an empty lacrosse goal, you know? So now these guys, and the point was, and I thought it was extremely insightful, the point was these guys are trying to get in better shape, right? The Navy lacrosse team doesn't need to be in better shape. The Navy lacrosse team needs to shoot more lacrosse balls and work on their skills. So these guys, while they're working extremely hard, their culture of work is doing extra burpees and push-ups and sit-ups. We need their culture of work to be, all right, we've got 20 minutes before we need to be in the dining hall. Let's get 50 shots up, you know? Or I've got an hour in between one of my classes. I'm going to go rush to the field and spend 20 minutes working on my game. And I'm going to bring 4 guys with me, you know? And it's not that they don't want to do it. It's not that they're not capable of doing it. I just think that they have not been told or held accountable to doing it in the past. And hopefully that will change. And I think that small change will just help get us closer to the culture that we're looking for.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, everybody at any winning level is putting extra time into their skills and into their game, not just into their physicality. It's a great segue into a question that I love to ask, which is, can you talk a little bit about your philosophy on player development?
Yeah, it's, you know, it comes right from Coach Danowski, and we're going to teach the bare basics of every aspect of the game, you know, and this was validated for me when we were with Team USA the past 4 years. And the way we taught those guys was so simple, Jamie, and we just wanted to make the game simple for them, not complicated at all. I mean, we would teach – I found myself teaching the same exact thing I would work on with a 7-year-old from a defensive standpoint in terms of stance and approach and takeaway and leverage and all the little details of being a defender. I found myself talking to guys like Joe Fletcher and Tucker Durkin about the same exact thing and doing the same exact drills because I believe in the old football adage that the team that blocks and tackles the best is going to have the best chance to win. In lacrosse, it's the same thing, right? If you can approach great on defense, be on the same side of the field as the ball, play with your stick out in front, be in a passing lane, you know, scoop up a ground ball with 2 hands, run to the man you're passing to, cut to the right pipe with your right hand, cut to the left pipe with your left hand, all those little things, you know, dodge with your shoulders square before you go downhill. Those little aspects, if you can do that consistently, you're going to put yourself in position to be in a winnable game. So when we talk about player development, we're going to break each person down in the strict fundamentals of the skills that they need, and then build them up. You know, build them up through routine, repetition, and competition. Once we build up a base that they can work off of.
You've got some awesome assistant coaches. And Coach Orson came over from Denver and coached with you, and Coach Ross, who came over from Ohio State. Can you talk a little bit about, it must have been so much fun for you to have a couple guys to be able to pick their brains, you know, like your huge rival at Denver, you know, you're great friends with Coach Orson, who I remember, by the way, as a left-handed attackman from like Cold Spring Harbor High School that I tried to recruit to the University of Denver back probably when you were still in school. But obviously he's a guy that, you know, you've been friends with for a long time, but you probably didn't get all the secrets on. And then Coach Ross, working for Nick Myers, I mean, at Ohio State, man, they're so impressive with what they do, with how they prepare and how they think through everything. Can you talk a little bit about their impact and kind of what you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the coup of the summer for me, honestly. I think both those guys are prepared to be head coaches. You know, I mean, if those guys got head coaching opportunities this past summer, nobody would have batted an eye. So I'm blessed to have both of them on staff with me. They have complete autonomy on their side of the ball. I trust them implicitly. The recruiting, I can see already, has stepped up because the three of us are acting like head coaches, and we're having conversations consistently that I never dreamed of having as a staff. And we're in it because those guys know everybody, and not only they know everybody, they know what to do. They're not learning on the job, right? They've been around great people, certainly have been in great programs and been successful. They've proven themselves. So I'm lucky. I really am. I think our personalities match pretty well. I think John and I bring the intensity, and Brad is he's the soft-spoken, analytical guy. That's why he went to Duke, I guess. Us Hofstra guys try and rough him up a little bit. But I can see us, the three of us, certainly John and I have a relationship in the past, but the three of us becoming great friends mostly. That to me is really important because, we're going to spend more time together over the course of the next several years, hopefully, than we'll spend with our families at some point. So we've got to get along. And for me, it's about us making mistakes together, and I don't want those guys to ever worry about making a mistake, and I don't think they will. I think that we've built up that trust already. So it's going to be fun to see what we can do together because they're extremely talented.
No doubt. I mean, like you said, to be able to spend time, you just want to, if nothing else, just be around people that you want to be around, and so those guys are awesome, and I'm sure they're going to bring a ton to the table.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is brought to you in part by the JM3 Coaches Training Program. If you are a coach interested in sharpening your saw, like so many of the guests on the show, you are going to love the content in this program. Go to www.jm3coaches.com for more information.
Can you give us a little bit of an idea of how you, from a philosophical perspective, how you want to play defense? Is it going to be similar to what you've done?
Yeah, we're going through that a little bit now. I think we're going to be a little bit more aggressive than I've been in the past. One, because I think we have a little bit more depth from just a fitness standpoint. We got a bunch of guys who all look the same. They're athletic, they're tough certainly, but they're in great shape. So we've got to leverage that. We've got to leverage that to our advantage. So we're going to start to be a little bit more aggressive. But John, the stuff he did at Denver, he was multiple, and he was multiple in some unique ways. There were times where they packed it in, and played really tight, and they took out a lot of the picking game because of their compactness.
Yep.
So we'll change up a little bit and kind of see how that looks. But right now, it looks like as we start practice here, we're going to kind of push out a little bit just to utilize our athleticism, because I think you can pull them back. You can always pull them back, but it's hard to push them out once you teach in tight stuff. So.
No doubt. And with the shot clock, your advantage is you can put some pressure on, and you don't have to do it for an unlimited amount of time.
Right. And hopefully you get the ball on the ground a little bit, and you can score some goals or get some opportunities from defense to offense. And as an offensive guy, it's a pain in the neck to play against someone who's going to be in your grill, for two possessions, and then, back in tight, maybe a possession or two later on. You just don't know what's coming.
No doubt. It was pretty interesting to watch the way Coach Orson played defense in last year, where they would just let themselves get hung up against shorties every time and never go behind the net. It was like, you know what? Everyone always makes fun of women's lacrosse when they don't go behind and play it, but actually, you know what? It's a little harder to score when it's packed in than you think.
It's a pain in the neck, honestly. We toyed with that, and we did not come up with a good counter to it that worked consistently. So, what you do is just move the ball. You don't dodge from X.
Yeah.
You don't bring your short sticks back there. So, we'll see. We'll see if he continues to do that.
Yeah. Offensively, Coach Ross, they did so many amazing things at Ohio State. And like I said, on my little RV trip, I got a chance to sit down and watch him do some whiteboard work. And he's just so well-versed in everything. How are you guys planning on trying to play on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I agree with you. He is extremely well-versed. I think there are a ton of scripts that he's got, but our goal, and I've told him this, is to become less scripted. And I think he wants to be. I think we want the guys to play a little bit more free. I want our guys to have fun. I want our guys to have fun on the offensive end and find different ways to score goals than just what's on paper. I think Brad can scheme with the best of them, and I think he's excited for the opportunity to play a little bit more open and free than the way they did at Ohio State. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that's what's worked for those guys certainly over a long period of time.
Yeah.
I just think here everything we do is so in the box from an institution standpoint. When we get our guys to play just a little bit outside the box, then we're going to be we can do some pretty cool things.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that, there's value to scripting things, and you can see it work, and people win championships doing that. And there's value to kind of letting guys play, even like Coach Danowski at Duke. I mean, those guys, they've kind of done the same things for all these years. And it's very, very simple, whether it's their 1-3-2 motion or whether it's their pairs, but they just get really good at it. And what they really do is they end up adding repertoire to the individual player. And I feel like that's where your upside is. And I think when you let them play, maybe you can take advantage of that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you're right. I mean, that's a good comparison with the Duke guys because what they do is extremely simple. Certainly, they have great athletes and guys with great skill, but what they're doing from an X's and O's standpoint is not that complicated.
And it's not. I read a quote recently that I want you to give me an opinion on. It was this quote from this soccer guy that was talking about isolated practice versus like practices that were more unstructured, not so much like just let them do whatever you want, but more like free play oriented, right? And it talked about when an athlete is out there, they have to process what's happening around them. Say they're on offense, they have to process who's guarding them, where the other defenders are, where their teammates are, what their teammates are doing, where the space is, where the goal is. They got to process all of these things and then make a decision. And they have to then make a decision and execute that decision with a technique. And when everybody works on technique, isolated, you're missing out on maybe the most important part of the entire thing. And the reason why I bring this up is just the way you're talking about wanting to play is going to be less scripted, in which players have to be able to process, just like on defense. You got to process what's happening around you, and then you have to make a decision. And then indecision is just as big of a problem as the wrong decision. And at the end of the day, the technique sometimes – we wonder why we can look so good in practice, or why doesn't he use the skills he has in practice in the game? But oftentimes it's because they're just not as good at processing and making decisions. And I just wanted you to just talk about that concept, if it resonates with you, and how it fits into how you're sort of thinking about playing.
Well, I think the game is won and lost in the gray area, especially at the highest levels when the athleticism and the skill is pretty even, right? It's those gray moments where you haven't seen it in practice. If you're practicing scripted all the time, right? And guys need to make decisions on their own, and they need to play instinctively as opposed to playing to what the coach told them exactly, this is going to happen. If this, then that. So I think the amount of time, if you can put more time for your players into that gray area and just let them play, and that's like you said, it's not just rolling the ball out.
Right.
It's designing drills that there is a little bit of structure to it, but there's some freedom in decision-making and either making a mistake or not making a mistake, because that's a skill in itself is just identifying the right play to make instinctively. They need to learn that, and they need to fail in that. So the more opportunity those guys have to do it in practice, that it's not just robotic, okay, this is exactly what to do, this is exactly what not to do. I think there's more lacrosse plays. There's more plays in a lacrosse game that are like that than there are not. And it's on the onus as us as coaches to put our guys in those positions more consistently.
And figure out, you mean in practice, to put yourselves in positions where they can be making decisions on stuff where it's not totally scripted as to what's happening, so they can actually make a decision.
Right. Yeah. And, when you think about drills, you think about trying to this is the concept of the drill we want to teach, but how is a way we can make this is there a way we can adjust this drill to make it a little bit less scripted so that there is some decision-making that needs to happen on our guys' part? And let's see how they react,
You could argue that drills that don't involve decision-making have major diminishing returns.
Well, I think if you're trying to teach a basic fundamental skill, I don't think the decision-making is necessary. But when you're trying to enhance that skill in real life, in real speed, then yes, it will have diminishing returns.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier. You talked about recruiting and how happy you are with your staff being able to have conversations with recruits as if they're all head coaches. And that is huge to be able to have that kind of experience, to create those relationships, as well as to sort of have that kind of, just presence. But talk a little bit about what you look for in players. And if you would, I would love to hear your opinion on that, position by position, because oftentimes there's positions within positions.
Yeah. So I think, obviously we all want big, fast, and strong, right? And skilled, but we all can't have all of that. If there's there's two things that I look for in a recruit. Once you get past the initial clearinghouse of those physical and mental or physical attributes, the two major factors for me is, one, we have to identify that young man's willingness to play with an edge or have something to prove. He's got to have something to prove, right? Whether he's a little bit undersized and he's got to prove that he's bigger than the rest, or he's been a little bit under-recruited, or he's a star player and he wants to prove that he can put a program on his back and be the star player at the next level. I've got to identify that with my investigation of that young man. And then the second thing, and probably most important, he's got to really, really want to be here. I mean, have a burning desire to be at our place. And honestly, the root of that is, I'm not going to convince a kid ever. I never did this at Hofstra, Marquette, Penn. I'm not going to convince a kid to come to our school. I'm going to show him the opportunity, show him the resources, put him in place, or him in place here in terms of what his life will look like. And then I'm going to sit back and listen, because if I have to convince a kid, especially here at the Naval Academy, to come here, then it's not the right fit. It's not the right fit for him. It's not the right fit for us. So once we get past all those physical factors, those two things are the last thing we try and identify, and we won't move on a kid unless we're convinced of it. I just don't think it's worth it, because I think for us as coaches, our job is to get the most out of individuals and have them surpass their potential. And on the front end of that, the only way we can do that is on the front end, we've got to identify all of those things and make sure that they're in the right environment to be successful. To be challenged and fail and succeed, they've got to know that they're in the right place. When you think about position by position, look, the two specialty positions, goalie and faceoffs, I wish I had the answer there. I want Trevor Baptiste and John Galloway. So I'll take those types of players on the faceoff and the goalie. But moving past that, attack-wise, everybody wants the guy who can play at X, who can be a threat both-handed, both righty and lefty, and threaten the defense in the triple threat position. I think those guys are harder to come by nowadays as the game becomes more specialized. But that would be at the top of the list. But beyond that, if a guy is not going to be that great athlete who can break down a defense and get to the goal both-handed, he's got to have one of a few different high-level skills. He's either got to have unbelievable hands that he can fit into an offense and be the guy at the end of the rainbow, okay? Colin Monroe would be a guy like that, a guy who can catch and shoot and do things off of a pass and be really skillful, okay? Or he's got to have a tremendous inside presence, just an ability to get open, and you may not notice him that much, but you notice him when the light goes on because he scores, right? He just figures out a way to score goals, like Ryan Brown would be a guy who I think of. Ryan is not the world's best athlete. He's certainly a world-class shooter, but before he's a world-class shooter, he knows how to get open. He just knows how to get open.
He does. And the ball goes in for him.
Exactly. Yeah. But he's got to get open first. So, and then other than that would be a great dodger. A guy can be a great dodger, and he can draw a slide and be the initiator on the attack. But again, I think that goes back to there's less and less of those guys at the attack level. Midfield-wise, two aspects. Offensively, we want downhill dodgers who can separate and shoot on the run. Certainly, there's the Paul Rabel types out there, but there's not many of those guys. But I think it goes back to, again, I think of a guy like Mike Chanenchuk. Mike Chanenchuk is just a great lacrosse player at the midfield. He can play in the gray. He can shoot with both hands. He's not going to blow past you if he's squaring his shoulders at the top of the box or the side of the box, but he can separate in some space enough to utilize his body, you know? So guys at the midfield need to get their hands free when they have the opportunity, whether that's a big north-south dodger or they're creative enough and have good enough control of their body on the wing. I think the second part of the midfield is the short stick defensive midfielder, where I believe that is the number one position in the sport.
Yep.
And we recruited heavily. They were scholarship players for us at Marquette and Hofstra. And I've been blessed to be around a bunch of them who have played at a really, really high level. And we're going to continue to look for those guys. We need the world's best athletes in our sport at that position. And we'll continue to look for guys who are just great athletes.
It's like having a corner that you don't have to,
you don't have to worry about it.
It
changes the way you coach defense. It really does. You know, it changes the way you coach defense. I mean, you know, for me, coaching guys like Jake Richard, Kevin Unterstein, Stephen Danowski, Julian Watts, all those guys were All-Americans. When they were on the ball, we never had to slide, you know, and now you got a fifth pole out there. And then if they have some skill on top of that, as the game progresses into more up and down, they're going to be even that much more impactful. But before skill in that position is athleticism, no doubt about it. I'll take a football player who's never played the sport before I'll take a guy who's identifies as a D-midi who's just not a good athlete.
How do you evaluate it, though? Because sometimes, you know, great athletes that have all the size and speed and twitchiness in the world, but then they bite on like any jab. You know what I mean? You ever seen those guys super athletic, but you know, how do you figure out that balance between some guys, just like Ryan Brown, the ball goes in for him. Some guys just can just have a sense for how to stay with your hips, you know, and how do you judge that?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I think that's one area where I have a pretty good eye for, Jamie, and I don't know if it's one thing, but I'll always watch a guy's hips relative to the guy he's playing against, and I'll identify if he's patient or not. If the guy's athletic enough, he can move with someone, right? But does he have the control of his hips relative to the other player? Do his hips go in the wrong direction? Does he open up when a guy gets in the drop step? What does that explosion look like off of that drop step? But on top of that, a guy can do all those things but be really impatient, right? And try and maul players and be over-aggressive.
Yeah.
So then I ask myself, all right, is he over-aggressive because he hasn't been taught, or is he over-aggressive because that's just who he is, you know? Like a guy like I remember is Julian Watts, who we coached at Hofstra, and John Danowski and I recruited him off the football field. We went to watch St. Anthony's High School play football at Stony Brook and had no idea who Julian Watts was. But here was this kid who was playing wide receiver, and Keith Weiser came up to us and said, we were talking, he's like, and we said, who's that guy? And he says, yeah, it's Julian Watts. And I think we joked, like, he should play lacrosse. Like, well, he does. He was going to Marist to play football.
Wow.
And Dino's like, he's not going to play football. He's coming to Hofstra. And before you knew it, the kid was, one of the best short sticks in the country, and helped us go on a run in 2006. And solely because him and Kevin Unterstein were the two short sticks. We never slid during the year. I mean, we just played man-to-man defense, old school, go get your man, and that's it.
That's probably the best way if you can play that way.
You look like a great coach when you don't have to, talk about sliding and recovering.
No doubt. Hey, before you move on to the defenseman, I just want to touch base with you on the dodging element of the middies in the attack, and you sort of said it, but there's a difference between like running by your man and getting by your man. And you sort of talked about, Chanchuk just getting his hands free. He doesn't blow by his guy the way Rabel and Pizer did back in the day, but he's able to get hands free. And there's a lot of guys that, are able to, roll back to the middle or get underneath you and fake their way to the net and get by their guy, either with physicality and post-up type stuff or just with sort of slickness and deception. What is your take on that concept?
I think that's a skill, and that's something that is not taught that well in the high school level. When you see a guy who can do that, then you're really impressed with him. And I think more and more as the game grows and better athletes there's more depth of athleticism at the midfield, guys who have that body control and that ability to separate themselves with contact, those are going to be the difference makers in our sport.
I agree.
Because you see more and more, even at the college level, Jamie, right? I mean, look, everybody's got good athletes and everybody's got good schemes and everybody works at scouting, but it's those guys, and that's the whole gray area we were talking about.
It's the gray area. It's
the gray area. It's a guy who's, like we're going to do one-on-ones here in a little while of practice, and the guys, there'll be guys who blow past someone and get their hands free, but that's not going to happen consistently. And it's not going to happen consistently. And if it does, you're going to get slid to, right? And if you're going to get slid to and be a scorer, how are you going to take on that slide? Or how are you going to duck underneath when no one's sliding to you and utilize your body just to get your hands free for a little moment to be a threat?
No doubt. That's kind of like back to the, you've got to process everything, and then you have to make a decision, and then you have to use a skill. When you're going one-on-one, it's not just beating your guy. It's the fact that you've got sliders and adjacent people crowding you constantly. Right. And that's why sometimes the guys that are so fast is like, he can't run by his guy. Yeah, but he can get by his guy. I mean, you guys at Marquette did an amazing job of being able to play with mirrors and fake your way inside, underneath, top side, and I'm sure you guys are going to be able to do that here. And then the other thing I just noticed when I watched the PLL, more so than ever before, it's the physical guys the physical attackmen, whether it's Matt Rambo or Cuccinello or Connor Fields. They all got different body types, but they're all physical, and they figure out how to get shots off in that gray area. Should we slide? We can't slide. Should I be cross-checking and pushing or they're just sort of like in this gray area right along the perimeter of where you think you should be pushing and driving a guy out, but all of a sudden you're a little too far out and they're ducking underneath you.
Yep, exactly right. And we're going to see more guys like that make an impact in our sport.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so defensemen.
Yeah, defensemen, it's all about feet. I can care less about their hands. I think the hands are an added bonus, but especially at the close defensive area, we need guys with great feet who can cover. I think about BJ Grill, and I didn't care that he was 5'3". I really didn't. He had unbelievable feet. He had high level feet, and you can teach a guy to move on angles if he's got great feet. If he can move left and right, he's got hips that can open up, and he's got good speed in short bursts. You don't necessarily need to be the biggest. You don't necessarily need to be the fastest, but you got to have quick feet, I think, to be a cover defenseman at the Division I level. And then if you move down the list on that, you're not going to find guys who have that skill all the time. Guys who can learn how to play on angles, who have great control of their body, right? Or who just have instincts off the ball, who are really instinctive off the ball, because that is really tough to teach at the college level, is all the off-ball stuff. Because you're not going to have 3 cover defensemen. Most teams won't. You need at least 2, but then you need a third guy or a fourth guy to be the guy who's going to play inside most of the time or play off the ball and understand how to do those things.
It seems like, recruiting great feet, is makes total sense, because you want to be able to go cover the ball. But then when it comes time to figuring out who you're putting on the field, it seems like it's usually the smartest guys.
Well, I think the smartest guys understand how to play within their limitations and play, on angles, right? Because, and it goes back to before. If a guy's impatient and, over aggressive, well, he can have the best feet in the world, but he's never going to play because he puts himself out of position.
Yeah. How do you recruit IQ on defense? How do you evaluate it?
I think you really got to watch. You got to watch, and a lot of it is your resources, just talking to people and knowing the level of play. The one thing we found, or I did find at Marquette, was when we got away from the traditional areas of our sport, the New Yorks, Baltimores, Philadelphias, just that Northeast corridor where we started recruiting.
Yeah.
We got away from that. The lacrosse IQ, the growth, it was tough. Guys from other areas of the country, while they were very good players, their IQ was really a challenge to teach at the pace we needed to teach it. Mm-hmm. So I think the level of play that guys consistently play at is really important. I think that teaches them an IQ, or their mind works at the speed closest to what they need when they enter college. So that's why I like the traditional areas the most now as we start to recruit here at the academies. We got to find guys who can play at a really fast pace because they've always played at a fast pace because every game they're playing is intense.
Yeah. And that's the concept of processing what's happening around you so you can make quick decisions and use your technique.
Exactly right.
Hey, last question for you. How do you sharpen your saw, so to speak? How do you stay cutting edge? How do you continue to learn? And how does film fit into that for you?
I'm not a extremely big film guy, probably a lot less than most. For me, I do a lot of talking to other coaches. The thing I try and sharpen my skills with the most is from a leadership aspect, especially now being a head coach with 2 great assistants. I think it's my job to work on leadership and the mental aspect of our sport more than the X's and O's of our sport. I just think that that's the next level for success in our sport, is putting players in position to be fully present in the moment and focus on what's right in front of them so that they can be at their best, dealing with success and failure. So when I look to sharpen my skills with that, I do a lot of reading, Jamie, and a lot of work with just sports psychologists, mental game coaches. Here at the academy, we have a leadership center. I was over there last week talking to them and seeing how I can learn from that group to try and orchestrate a culture that is a big part of what we do. I just think the mental aspect of the game, the mental game has got to be a strategy. It just can't be how you're going to play defense and offense. It can't. I've often said culture is your greatest strategy. I believe that. But drilling that down, the mental aspect of lacrosse or sports, I think makes the difference at the highest level because everybody's got good players. Everybody's working their tail off in coaching, and they got great schemes. But it's how your players perform in the moment that matters most.
So would you say that do you have a blueprint of how you are going to be putting this all together, or is it kind of like just a process of adding as you learn, or a little bit of both?
Well, it is a little bit of both. I mean, I have had a rubric that I developed with Brian Kane, our sports mental game coach at Marquette. He and I worked tirelessly to try and put a rubric in place. It took us about 3 years to find something that we really identified worked at Marquette. And that's going to be the baseline for me. However, like I said earlier, my first challenge here is trying to understand this place and what these guys go through. So I'm not inserting that as aggressively as I did right away. The guys have to get to know me first and get to know our staff because we have to build trust and rapport. I can't just be force feeding them with deep breathing exercises and different mental game anecdotal stuff, and they'll think I'm some weirdo. So to answer your question in short, there is a rubric, but it's not identified exactly yet for this place.
What are some of the books that you would recommend to coaches as far as if they wanted to, learn some of what you've learned lately?
Well, go to the Mental Game of Lacrosse by Brian Kane with Joe Amplo. That's a good one to start with. That's a good just a good kind of orientation into how the mental game impacts lacrosse. But I think I will give you 3. I'll give you Pete Carroll's Win Forever, I think, is an excellent culture book. Legacy, I think, is an excellent one about the All Blacks. And probably one of my favorite books in terms of organization was Good to Great. I think that from an organizational standpoint, identified a lot of things that you can utilize no matter what organization you're in.
Love it. So you guys got any prospect days coming up that you want to tell people about in case they want to send kids to come get seen by the Navy lacrosse staff?
We have September 29th, baby. NavyLacrosseCamps.com. Check it out.
Awesome. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for the time. This is awesome. Best of luck to you, and hopefully our paths will cross one of these days.
Bring that Winnebago this way again when you come out.
We'll do. All right, man. Have a good one. See ya.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is brought to you in part by the JM3 Lacrosse Academy. This 10-week online program is designed to teach cutting-edge lacrosse skills and IQ. Athletes will learn dozens of new techniques, creative drills, X's and O's, and most importantly, how to integrate it all into their game. To learn more or start getting better today, go to www.jm3sports.com/academy.